We're reading this morning from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verse 1 to 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and they fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carolyn. Brilliant. Okay, so Easter Sunday. Here we go. He is risen. There we go. We almost got there, Tim. He is risen indeed, indeed. Absolutely. So I always feel a real sense of privilege or responsibility when speaking on the events that we celebrate at Easter, because the events that were celebrated all across this weekend, but the ones, again, that we're going to remind each other of this morning are the most significant, the most important, the most amazing events in all of human history. And my prayer for us this morning is that maybe if you've heard these stories hundreds of times, maybe 1,000 times before, that all of us would be re-amazed by Jesus and would fall more in love with him. And maybe for some of us this morning, that might be for the first time. You might be hearing this stuff. And I believe that you're going to be blown away by Jesus and what we see and how he meets with you. So firstly, I guess, especially for you guys, if you are new here or just visiting, you are so welcome. It is wonderful that we get to celebrate as a family, and for you to hear these stories. And I want to emphasize right from the start that these aren't just stories. These stories are real events that really did happen 2,000 years ago, that for 2,000 years now have been changing people's lives. And if you just scour around this room, you will see life after life with story after story of how they've met this real and risen Jesus, and how this real and risen Jesus has totally changed and transformed not just their life now, but their eternity. And so it's a wonderful thing that we get to explore and think about some of this stuff this morning. As a church, we've been working through Mark's Gospel recently. So in the New Testament, again, if you're new to all this stuff, in the New Testament, that's all the stuff like from Jesus' birth to when he's going to return and the start of the church and different bits and pieces. You get 4 biographies of Jesus' life: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we're in Mark's Gospel that we've been studying as a church for the past few months. And Mark's Gospel was one of the earliest Gospels, one of the earliest biographies of Jesus' life, written about 30 years after the events took place. We're in chapter 16, so I'll be referencing chapters and verses. Again, if you're new to that, that's just like the address book of the Bible. So we're in Mark's Gospel, biography of Jesus' life in the New Testament. The big numbers, that's the chapters. The little numbers that I'll be referencing, they're the verses. So just a little bit of a heads up. For us as a church on Easter Sunday, we always come absolutely bouncing, like buzzing. We get a wonderful full English breakfast. Yes, I love full English breakfast, which is brilliant. Freddie had toast and jam, which is probably accounts for running, and all the mess on the back of my shirt, so I'll stay facing this way. We get to sing some incredible songs, don't we? We shout and we do our call and responses as we gather together for worship this morning, because we kind of know where chapter 16 of Mark is going. But for the first disciples 2,000 years ago, they had no idea where this was going. They didn't know that Mark chapter 16 gets to Mark chapter 16, verse 8. They had no idea. When they woke up on Sunday morning, they would have been still very much grieving, devastated. They'd seen their friend, their teacher, brutally killed, and they wouldn't have had anything to celebrate. They wouldn't have been cracking a full English breakfast on the go at all. And we meet in Mark's gospel these three women, and people deal with grief in a whole bunch of different ways, don't they? And for these women, it's clear that for them, doing something practical was going to be helpful on this Sunday morning. So this is what we read in verse 1. It says that when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Then Mark tells us, verse 2, very early on the next day of the week, sorry there, Nick. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? So they were still being very distressed. They were up early, maybe struggling to sleep, keeping busy, thinking through the practicalities, like who's going to roll the stone away. I wonder if for any of us that have gone through deep grief, maybe some of those responses we resonate with a little bit. And I want to reference that because it shows again that we're talking about real people here in a real time, dealing with real despair at this point, in a real desperate situation. But when they get there, they didn't find things quite as they expected, did they? It says this, verse 4, when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And you just wonder in this moment, what sort of questions began to race through their minds. So they'd known that one of Jesus' mates, this guy called Joseph, he was a guy who was very wealthy but also very prepared. He's the sort of guy that planned his funeral like decades in advance. He even sorted out a tomb for himself. But after Jesus' death, he gave that for Jesus' body to be placed. So they knew they were looking for this tomb that Joseph of Arimathea had set up. But now they're presented with this scene where the tomb and the stone's being rolled away. That's not what they expected at all. They expected to go to the tomb, see it completely sealed, and also see at least a couple of Roman guards guarding the entrance to the tomb. That's not what they found at all. I wonder maybe whether they're thinking like, did Google Maps play up on the way over? Like, what's going on here? There would have been a whole bunch of questions racing around their minds. And then things get even more, like, I'm not even sure what the word is, strange, unexpected, terrifying, because verse 5 tells us that as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side of the right side, and they were alarmed. I'm not sure alarmed would quite capture how I'd be feeling in that moment. I'd be confused, amazed, terrified. Again, just think through what would be racing through the women's heads as they're now standing before this angelic being. And this angel has listened carefully in angelic messenger school, because lesson 1 in angelic messenger school is when you meet a human, say, don't be alarmed, don't be scared, don't be afraid. And that's exactly what this angel says. Verse 6 says, don't be alarmed, he said. Do you ever look for something in the wrong place? Apparently, in our house, we like to think that everything has its place, which is probably true, but it's just that sometimes those places can change depending on who last used the item. And then you throw Freddie into the mix, and it's just carnage. Or he's a brilliant excuse. Jess is like, how did that get on the top shelf? I'm like, Freddie's a good climber. Just, we need to get a grip of him. Sometimes you're looking for things in the wrong place, aren't you? And these women, the angel goes on to explain, they were looking for something in the wrong place. Listen to this. These couple of, few sentences here are the most important, most significant, most amazing sentences in all of human history. You were looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. Fact, absolutely. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. You were looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. This is the most amazing, most important, most significant sentences in all of human history. For 2,000 years of church history now, people have said, Christians and non-Christians alike have said, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, you can just take the whole thing off the table. And it's interesting because the New Testament agrees with that way of thinking. There was a guy called Paul who was one of the leaders of the early church, and he used to write letters to some of the Christians way back in the day, and he wrote a book called, we call 1 Corinthians. It was a letter written to the Corinthian church, and he said this: If there is no resurrection from the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. If Jesus hasn't been raised from the dead, if Jesus isn't alive, then we have no hope. And all of this, including the full English breakfast, is just a complete waste of time. Can we believe it? But this means then that the biggest, the most crucial question for every human throughout all of human history is this: did Jesus really rise from the dead? Is Jesus alive? We first of all, we don't have time to go through all of the evidence for this, but it is vast and it is deep and it is strong and it is reasonable and it is well worked through by minds way brighter than mine. But let me go through some of the highlights here. The first place you look when you're thinking about any events of any degree or magnitude is you look to see if there are any eyewitnesses to those events. So like I've mentioned, we've got the New Testament, first four Gospels, four books in the New Testament, the Gospels we call them. They're the biographies of Jesus' life: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And all of them speak of Jesus' life. They all speak of his death. And they all speak of his resurrection. So their eyewitnesses are all agreed on that fact. Then you go into the early church. So the book of Acts we have in the New Testament, and then some of the letters. And again, all of that points to the reality that this Jesus, he lived, he died, and he rose again. Also in the Gospels and the letters, you hear accounts of Jesus meeting with people after he rose from the dead. 1 Corinthians 15 speaks about how he appeared to 500 people all at one time. And so the New Testament it's one of the most reliable historical documents that we have access to. And all of the stuff in the New Testament agrees and points to the truth, to the fact that Jesus really did live, he really did die, and he really did rise again. The next place that you can look now is 2,000 years of church history. Again, through hardships, through persecutions, the church has continued to grow, to spread this good news. It started way back at what we read in the New Testament in the book of Acts, where you have this complete transformation from a small group of disciples who were at one point absolutely terrified and shook to their core that their leader, their teacher, their friend had been killed and murdered, and he's alive, and they suddenly are transformed into these bold and passionate group of people, all sharing the good news that Jesus is alive, willing to give their life for that good news, willing to go to the ends of the earth for that good news, all of them saying, Jesus is alive. And that message has been passed on from generation to generation right across the world for 2,000 years of history now. And then the final bit, just for this morning, like I mentioned right at the start, if you looked around this room, you will see a group of people, all at various ages and stages, most of whom have the story, can proclaim the statement that they believe Jesus is alive. Most of whom in this room can tell you stories of how they've met with this Jesus. They've heard him speak to them in different ways. They've seen him answer prayers. They've known him come close and comfort when they were feeling really low. They've enjoyed the wonder of being part of the family of this Jesus, the church. They've seen him heal. They've seen him and felt him bring boldness as they share this good news with others. Testimony after testimony, story after story of just the believers in this room. And I can tell you, across this room, like I say, we've got people from all sorts of different backgrounds. We've got people even who support Newcastle in here. And even they met Jesus. Like, how merciful and wonderful is the grace of God. Like, we've got people who've been at university. We've got people who have set up businesses in the trades. We've got kids who are still at school. We've got big, older kids who left school a long, long time ago. So many stories across this room saying Jesus is alive. Did Jesus rise from the dead? I'm saying the evidence points strongly to the conclusion that yes, he did. Absolutely. And this angel goes on to explain that Jesus had tried to give them a bit of a heads up. But I guess we shouldn't be too harsh on them at this point in the story, should we? Because I'm not sure I would have believed Jesus at the time either. But this is what he says. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And then Mark describes, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. But we know from the rest of the Gospels that they did pluck up the courage to go and tell the disciples. And it was these three women, it really is amazing, that had the privilege of coming to realize and then go on to proclaim the most important fact, the most important news in all of human history. There's no discovery, no news, no facts, no breakthrough in science, the arts, culture that can surpass the magnitude of the resurrection. And it's incredible, isn't it, that these three women were the first to realize, to hear this news, and then to go on to announce it. And over the coming days, following on from Mark 16, Jesus began to reveal himself to his disciples, like we mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, to 500 all at the same time. And so convinced were this first small group of believers that Jesus really was alive, that he really did rise, that their lives radically changed. They risked everything, giving their lives proclaiming this news that Jesus is risen, because the evidence was so overwhelming. And like we said, if Jesus didn't rise, you can take the whole thing off the table. But if Jesus did rise, and we believe that he absolutely did, then everything that he promised is back on the table. You might be sat here this morning full of guilt. You know you've messed up. You know you've made mistakes. Jesus came to set us free from sin, to cast our sin as far as the east is from the west. You might feel lonely. Jesus, when we believe in him, we become part of this worldwide family called the church. Jesus, we believe, is the God of all hope to the hopeless. We believe that Jesus is the God of all comfort to those who are hurting. We believe that Jesus came and he promised life in all of its fullness. Life, not just now, but life for eternity with him. And all of that is now back on the table because Jesus isn't in the tomb. He is risen. He is alive. Each of the people that you meet in the Gospels, from these women to some of the disciples, they go through a bit of a process of gathering the evidence, like figuring out bits and pieces, still with questions, and then an encounter with Jesus comes, and they believe. And maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you're here, maybe for the first time, and you've heard some of the evidence, you've heard some of the stories. Maybe you've recognized that you've been looking for things in the wrong place. Well, I can promise you that you're not going to find life, real life, full life, anywhere else other than in Jesus. You, whether you knew it or not, you're looking for Jesus the Nazarene. He was dead, he was crucified, but he has risen. He is not in the tomb anymore. You can go see the place where they laid him. You won't find life, satisfaction, freedom, fulfillment in anything else, only in relationship with Jesus. And if you've been hearing this stuff, I believe that Jesus has been meeting with you and stirring something in your heart that you just know right now it's true. And Jesus doesn't ask you to write a book, take an exam. All he asks for you now is say, Jesus, I believe. I give my life to you. I want to start following you right now. And that is it. And you are saved. You're welcomed into this family of the church. You're going to experience life in all of its fullness now and for eternity. Do that now. And for those of us who have heard this stuff, maybe for the 1,001 time, that's easy to say, the 1,001th time, I hope it's fired us up again, that Jesus, our Jesus, really is alive. We've got some great news. So let's crack on sharing it. Eh? So this is our Jesus, the Nazarene, was crucified. He has risen. Amen? Amen. Bless you, Tim.